Welcome to episode 25 of the Free Spirit Academy podcast with registered dietitian and somatic nutrition therapist Tracy Brown. Free Spirit Academy is about you being fully you. My name is Randy Moss, and I'm an eating psychology coach and Kundalini yoga teacher, bringing you conversations about freedom. Largely from rigid diets and painful body image, but ultimately it's about the freedom to be yourself. This is about honoring our own bodies and our purest self-expression. Welcome to the podcast. There are some people that just seem to be born for doing what they're doing, and I feel that way about Tracy because she's been guiding people in healing from disordered eating and dieting for the last 12 years or so, and it wasn't because she had this lifelong dream of doing this. It was because she couldn't find solutions for her own disordered eating and struggles until she was at enough of a rock bottom that she sort of discovered them herself. And we'll talk about that story right up front. Of course, she's had an incredible amount of training and skill building since her initial discoveries, but I found her journey so interesting because of this. And she and I both agreed that in our journey, talking to a therapist about eating disorder stuff did us little, if any, good. And that's not to say there aren't incredible therapists out there. Just something that we saw for ourselves was that talking wasn't enough. Not that therapists can't be really, really wonderful, but that talking was not enough. And it wasn't until we really got into an embodied experience that we really started to see any sort of shift. And what I find even more remarkable about Tracy's journey is that she embraced a non-diet, body-positive approach before phrases like body positivity or even intuitive eating were really a thing. And so she was kind of scrappy with it, making her own way. And while there were great teachers on her path, and she'll talk about that, this was by no means a mainstream sort of approach. And this conversation was also fun because I help admin an intuitive eating group on Facebook where Tracy's kind of the head honcho, and this was the first time we've actually connected outside the group. So you will also hear us talk about ideas about normal eating, because often we'll hear people say, and I remember saying this too, like, oh my God, I just want to be a normal eater. So we'll talk about ideas about normal eating and why becoming an intuitive eater might make you anything but normal. And we'll talk about the idea that intuitive eating is going to lead to perfect eating. Like if I'm really intuitive, then it's just going to be like the perfect hit the nail on the head thing every time. And we'll talk about why that's actually not true. Decoding thoughts like I feel fat, for example, and what that might actually mean. Talk about how to listen to the language of the body and the differences between intuitive eating and attuned eating. And do check the show notes for the plethora of free resources that Tracy offers, as well as how you can work with her if this conversation speaks to you. And before we dive in, I'll end this introduction with a quote that really jumped out at me as I was stitching this all together. Tracy said, "Instead of needing to work on yourself, are you just willing to not abandon yourself?" I hope you enjoy this conversation with Tracy Brown. I've seen you talk about in your writing when we have that intense, nagging, painful thought, I feel fat, that it's never about the food. And that it's really a call for our attention. And I think this is something that can be absolutely maddening for people to hear because for so many of us, it genuinely feels like if we just got our body to the place we wanted it, everything else would be fine. Like somehow magically our entire life would fall into place. So in your experience, what was the journey of discovering that feeling fat and that desperate desire to change your body was actually about so much more than your body?
Well, I can actually, there's just so many little instances, but I guess we're going to start with the most dramatic one is I remember one night I had done my regular routine. I was in my early 20s and the regular routine was, over exercise, restrict my food, and then binge at night. This was like a 5-year deal. And prior to that was a lot of just straight up restricting. And naturally, disordered eating and diet issues, everything morphs because like what works for a while isn't going to work forever. And everybody switches behaviors or rules or something at some point. So anyway, I remember a day where for whatever reason, and this is where the I feel fat moment comes in. Now that it's not a whatever reason, but I didn't recognize at the time that I had a lot up for me in that moment. And I was like feeling a lot of feelings. I didn't know that at the time, but I had done my regular disordered routine of restricting and over exercising. And I had already binged and I was really full and it was late at night and I was still, it didn't work. I wasn't numb. And, you know, of course I felt fat because it's like, oh, see, I'm full and I feel like my pants are expanding and I feel I'm out to here. And like, but I was just freaking out, desperate, but I couldn't go back to it wasn't safe to get out in the middle of the night and go exercise. And I couldn't really eat anymore because I was just disgusted anyway. And I couldn't get any more in. So I literally just laid on the floor and laid there in this utter anguish and despair of like feeling gross, feeling disgusting, feeling fat. And I laid there and laid there and laid there. And eventually, I think this was 20 minutes. And eventually I started to notice, I don't recommend people do this because this is really intense by yourself to like be there. Your first moment of actually ever feeling feelings and being thawed out is laying there on the bathroom floor on the cold, hard tile. And I recognize like, oh my gosh, my butt hurts from laying here for so long and it's cold and my head, like I got a little bump on the back of my head, just kind of where how my skull is like, ow, that's kind of digging in. And then I could feel the hardness of the floor of the floor on my heels. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm actually not in any of those scenarios in my head that like, oh my gosh, I'm gaining weight and nobody will ever love me and my life is over and I can never be happy. Because once I started to feel like my body in like, 2000, this is the year like 2000 or something like that, 1999, 2000, could feel myself actually in my body. It's like, oh my gosh. So literally, well, how I feel, is that actually happening? I don't know. Like that I'm 2 sizes bigger than I was like 2 hours ago. It felt like it, but now what I feel is these sensations of my body. And what my brain's telling me is like, if I was actually 2 sizes bigger, all these things would happen and my life would be over. And the answer is no. Like there are people in my life that probably aren't going to go anywhere if I'm 2 sizes bigger. They might question me. They might not like it, but they're probably still going to care about me. And I had to do like worst case scenarios. Right. And I started doing that. Like, okay, will my degree go away? Well, no, nobody can just strip you of your bachelor's degree because you're 2 sizes bigger. And is it likely that I'll never get a job? Probably not. I might face discrimination, but I'll probably get something at some point, somehow. And all those worst case scenarios of my body was this much bigger and all those feelings started to like kind of like drop in to where they need to be. So I started to recognize that just because I feel fat, I might be, that actually might be how my body is, but that doesn't mean that like feeling fat is a whole lot different than being fat. And these sensations aren't actually fatness right now because I have a body, but this heaviness in my chest isn't actually, this wasn't there like, let's say 2 days ago. Today it is. And then it started getting me clued into like, wait a minute, what's going on that's feeling like so much? Because, I know I binge all the time and it's making me maybe slowly gain weight, but it's not as big and as fast as it feels like in the moment. So it actually feels like so much. And then it turned out to be, oh yeah, my boyfriend, I know he's cheating on me. And I'm just like dawning on me to address that or to like admit it. And all the feelings and, oh my gosh, what am I going to do about this? This is too much. It's overwhelming, blah, blah, blah. So it was a lot.
That is a whole lot. And I can see why you don't necessarily recommend that people try and go and do that right away. Did you have any sort of background in like asking yourself those sorts of questions or, just
Nope.
like feeling your body on the floor? Nothing? You just sort of stumbled into it?
Yeah, it was one of those moments where I had done, this was, I was, I don't know, 21 maybe. And I had done some treatment for disordered eating when I was 18 for like a year or so. I was basically a therapy dropout just because it was too analytical. Now I needed something very now that I practice like somatic work, it's like I needed something very relational and somatic and attachment oriented and feeling safe, but it was too analytical. And so I kind of dropped out. It's like, well, okay, whatever. I eat more food. I'm not starving. I'm not blah, blah, blah. So I'm fine, I guess. And I left. I knew I wasn't better because I looked physically on the outside better, but I still was very tormented and very, diet cultured, obsessed, and, I got to be smaller. So it really didn't address the body image stuff. It just medically, I was better. I did happen, to have a brief, stint with a nutrition therapist who was non-diet, which was so unheard of back then. But again, this is another thing about, when it comes to getting help, most of us feel like we don't deserve it. And so I hadn't got to the place where I was willing to give myself more than I felt like I deserved treatment wise. So that's another story. So anyway, but she was very non-diet. That helped me with a little bit of permission around food and a lot of like, there's no magical foods. So that's the only background I'd had. I hadn't done a lot of body image work. It was just that day of like being so intensely, there's nowhere else I could go. There's no more restricting I could do or binging I could do or exercise I could do, or there was no escape. And I don't always recommend that, being so alone in that process, but that's just kind of what happened to me. It was not a planned thing. So after that, I started to recognize that there's a big difference between like feeling full of food and actually like be feeling full of emotion. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't really do much with that. I just kind of like, oh, whoa. Okay. And I used that a little bit and that helped me, there's other parts of my recovery and what helped me, but I just kind of always had that back in my brain all those years before I started practicing, as a, like eating disorder dietitian and nutrition therapist and intuitive eating person.
Because you had mentioned your bachelor's degree. Was that what you had begun studying already, or was this?
Yeah, I was in school. I was probably at that point maybe 2/3 through. I had this really weird school experience because of that dietitian I'd seen at 18. I saw her probably within the first year of school. So I was already like pretty jaded around I went to be a dietitian because of her. Like, oh my gosh, like I have so much comfort from her and she's not telling me to eat this or eat that. And there's not a wrong way to do things. And so I thought all dietitians were like that. So like, I want to do that because she was so caring and non-judgmental, and I'll do that because that's wonderful. And I love people and I like to know how things work. And really a lot of the decision to be a dietitian was just only based on that. And it's just something I kind of did. I'll be honest. It wasn't like I was dying to be a dietitian. Just like, it was very like I didn't really think it through very much, to be honest.
But I feel you didn't think it through, but it's like something was tugging on your heart. Like I feel like like following breadcrumbs. It's like you don't have the whole big picture, but it's like, okay, that's a good step, and that feels right, and that feels aligned with me, and then it sort of unfolds thing, and then you see like how it was all coming together. So that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, that's how it happened. It was like, oh, it was almost like one of those days. I'm like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be a dietitian. And I didn't even
a dietitian that was so like caring and loving and empathetic, then maybe that would have never interested you at all.
Oh no, I didn't even know what one was. I knew what one, because of my recovery, I'd worked with a couple, but they were very traditional. Like, here's your meal plan, have a nice day. And just, gain weight, eat normal, be normal, whatever. And it didn't really impress me very much, to be honest. And then, and was it helpful? When I met her, I'm like, oh, this is different. And in my brain that clicked this is what I'm going to do, but none of it was rational. So anyway, go ahead.
Too, because you were talking about the years of talk therapy and how none of that really did for you what somatic work did, or we should say, for anybody that doesn't understand that term yet, and I'll have you define it, just the feeling work. It's really crazy how we can have, like, I hear so many people say all the time, like, I know why I do this. I know why I binge eat. Why can't I stop doing it? But there's so much wisdom in the body that we're not getting to when we're just in the mind.
That's right. Yeah. So I'll just go through, so I'm having all these really bizarre, those experiences in my own journey, in and out of having people help me. And at the same time going to school. So I'm having this double life of learning how to be an intuitive eater and learning these concepts and hearing about health at every size. It was very baby. I mean, health at every size has actually been around, honestly, in different forms since the 60s. Wow. And just keeps, it started really with there was this organization of basically fat acceptance. And it just has slowly been growing, slowly been growing. And then kind of, there wasn't really the definitions of health at every size probably until the early 90s. But it wasn't, there's no mainstream about it. It was just like this group of honestly dietitians and therapists and just really concerned people who've had their own recoveries basically. Mm-hmm. And it's morphed into what you see today. So
and when you were getting into all of this, like, was intuitive eating really a thing, or was that just sort of like it was just non-diet for you?
Yeah, for me it was. So this is, well, the first book I read, which a lot of us, you know, a lot of our bridges courses, Janine Roth, and so I read, at 18 years old, by the way. So this is pretty crazy. I think back, like, gosh, like so young, but that's 21 years ago. But I read that book and I thought she was crazy, but there was something right about it. Like, of course, when you're hungry, stop when you're full. I mean, I had a big blind spot around like, and it'll help you lose weight. Cause of course I don't believe in that. It's a total like co-opt, but, there's still something, that's true about that. Like, oh, well, yeah, that's how we're actually wired to be, is we get signals, and we've just lost touch with that because we've been so disembodied by diet culture and our own traumas that we just don't know how to feel it or can't quite locate it, but it's there. So anyway, I'm kind of like doing a lot of fumbling around. I read a couple books that were really helpful way back then. There was no book Intuitive Eating, I think, until 1995 maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
But it wasn't well distributed, honestly. Like I didn't read it till probably, I don't know, 13 something years ago.
Yeah. So editions now, I feel like it didn't until a couple editions in.
It didn't really blow up till probably between the second and third edition.
Yeah.
But the first one I read, a long time ago, I'm like, okay, well, of course this makes sense. I kind of already did a lot of that. And a lot of it was just by my own desperation, to be honest. Like I would, try, like I would be binging on carbs, let's say, and sugary carbs and fatty carbs. And this is all in dietetic school. So I'm having this a separate life here. And over here, I'm making up food journals and nutrition class that like were the right dietitian journal, food looking, you're supposed to eat healthy, quote unquote. So I'm like totally making up food journals over here and learning about biochemistry over here. And over here, I'm working my way through trying to, whatever my definition was, I just want to be what I thought was a normal eater, which is like I eat 3 meals a day. I don't stress out about it. I didn't really care about body positivity and loving my body. I just wanted to care less. There wasn't any BOPO back then. There was just like, I want to be a person who puts on their clothes and just goes about your day, so.
We're defining normal. So normal looks like 3 meals a day, not worrying about food, not worrying about my body, about my life.
Yeah. It's not like I didn't care. Like if I didn't feel good, it was just, I wanted to be just a part of my day. Just part of life, and not feel guilty about eating leftovers for breakfast and cake for dinner. And I did all that stuff and just kept practicing. And to me, one of the bigger realizations, so I'm getting all this nutrition knowledge, like really in-depth stuff about how to treat different medical conditions, and whatever. And, and again, at the same time, it's still very diet centric. That's just the way that this profession is. And I recognized by the time I was about finished, and my eating I was doing pretty good at that point with my eating. I started to recognize, oh my gosh, all the things I'm discovering, like, okay, if I'm binging on carbs all day, I started to see, like, I look back on the rest of my day, I'm like, I barely eat any carbs for breakfast or lunch. So of course I'm going to be binging on carbs at night.
That's such an interesting thing to note, because people can get really caught up. And I want to talk a lot with you about the pitfalls of what people think intuitive eating is, or the kind of the little traps that we get into. And one thing I see is that people think intuitive eating is exactly what I want in
right.
Really, when listening to our body, we need to listen to these patterns in the big picture of our day. So like you said, if you are finding yourself in this binge on the carb pattern at this certain time of day, if you look at the whole of your day, it's going to find the imbalance.
Yeah. And even if it's not, people get a little bit, and understandably so, because we're just so afraid. But it's like, well, why am I binging today? Because I ate enough today. And I'll look at people's food, and I'll over like to say a couple days, like, well, if you look at the big picture and this rolling average, you're a deficit.
Right.
fats and carbs are energy food. You're gonna you're not, when you're at a deficit, are you craving salad? No. Your body
Oh my
wants fuel food. And so we have to look at this bigger picture. We have to look at our cycles. We have to look at our, what's going on with our immunity, our stress. That's another whole podcast, but
totally. And I think
yeah, go ahead.
because, well, I think it's challenging because most of us that come to intuitive eating are coming from a diet background. So we have this idea of what we think like good eating is. And oh, if I just eat intuitively, I'll end up being a good eater. And good eating looks like this. And this is sort of floating around in the back of our minds. So when we land in a certain place, we think like, oh, I'm being intuitive, I'm being good because it looks like this, but I'm making a mistake because I'm binging.
Right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whatever our food rules are, that's kind of our blind spot. It's hard to see like how that could be creating the imbalance and the struggle with what it might seem like it's you're binging, but you're just, most of my clients are honestly, if it's not pure like binging disorder, there's some deprivation driven eating, which is you're either not eating enough, you're not getting satisfied, or some combination of those things where you're limiting certain foods or food groups or whatever in the presence of or the absence of calorie restriction. So, once that gets cleaned up around the deprivation, you might find that some of those instances where it feels really bingy just drop off pretty quickly.
Totally. This is where I always say, because we're always saying, right, that it's not about the food. Ultimately, it's not about the food. And I sometimes say in some cases, it's not about the food, except when it's about the food. And in these cases, it's totally about the food, like the body's biological drive for like
Oh,
to
yeah.
keep you safe, to keep you fed, to keep you alive.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, the reasons that we restrict often are not about the food. So
Absolutely.
I'm sure you work in depth with that with people.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. This is it's like, yeah, you have to, I mean, when you're healing your relationship with food body, like you said, it's not about the food, but sometimes it's about like this relationship with food that you do have to tend to, meaning like it's even more confusing to try to work really deeply with the emotional eating if you've got deprivation driven eating. So I tell my clients, like, I'm with you 100% of the time. We're going to decode your I feel fat thoughts. We're going to do that. But I also know it's a whole heck of a lot easier if you're not in any kind of deprivation.
Yes.
This process will go a lot faster if we get rid of the calorie deprivation or the carb deprivation or whatever it is that's going on.
Totally. That was my blind spot. Like working through Janine Rock for years in my early 20s and like brain over binge and all of this stuff. It was like I could take in everything and I would read everything except for the fact that I couldn't restrict. So I would try and do all of this emotional work, but it didn't work because I wasn't actually feeding myself and I wasn't listening to anything.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. You can't, if there's deprivation driven eating, your binge eating is going to get in there some way.
Yes. You mentioned,
and that's not your fault or anybody's fault. That's just biologically how it's going to be.
And it means that your body's on your side. Like people think that this is your body is trying to betray you, but your body is always on your side. Everything comes with a message. And that's what I wanted to ask you about because you used the word decoding. And I really like that. Decoding the I feel fat thoughts. What do you mean by decoding and what are other things that you decode with your clients?
Okay. Yeah. So decoding is just, this is the way I explain, like I have I don't know if I have it. Well, I know I have it in my course and I do it in my sessions, but I have the decoding why. So we try to figure, I'll just explain it a little bit and you can't see it, but you can imagine it. It's like, in our culture, we have, basically kind of coupled, like the language of food and body has gotten all coupled with emotions. And there's another way to look at this too from like a nervous system perspective, but just emotionally, it's like in our culture, if we believe fat equals sad and don't care as much and all the negative descriptors, all the stereotypes, and then equals happy and got it together. Of course, those are going to be coupled with happy, mad, sad, or afraid. And so a lot of times when people are saying, I feel fat, I feel gross, some of those really, and not to, be triggery here, but even I feel dirty, all these different words that don't really align with like hunger fullness, or like a neutral relationship with the, food and emotion. It's like whenever that stuff is being said, it's almost like I feel fat. It's like code language for I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I look for it's like in any eating disorder, there's a code language there or diet mentality or anything we're doing. I call it food and body talk. Any kind of food or body talk, however you want to label it. You don't even need to label it anything, but just food and body talk. It's always, I feel uncomfortable. And our job, I feel like together with my client and I, is to, be good detectives and try to decode like what's the message you were actually trying to communicate that you haven't felt like probably your whole life, that you can actually just say like, I feel sad, or I feel like I'm too much, or it's not okay for me to have this or to feel this way or to do this thing, or just their own guilt for having needs or wants or whatever it is. So, when we're decoding, I feel fat, we're just getting usually to the heart of what's feeling uncomfortable. Sometimes it's not even anything's wrong. It's just this, it's not feeling okay to feel how they feel about something that like maybe you and I are like, of course you got mad about that thing, but a person might not feel okay about being mad about something, and it's getting transferred into the language of the body.
Yes. Oh, that's so important to say, because there's this programming around being like good girls, and good girls are sweet, and good girls are happy, and good girls smile, and good girls are kind and perky and all of these things. And so we can feel bad, or we can feel wrong, like we've done something wrong if we're sad, or if we're angry, or if we're mad, or any of these things that we perceive as negative.
Right. And it's really important to recognize that when people say, I feel fat, I feel gross, and I'm going to actually flip the coin and say, when I decode, I also look at like, oh my gosh, where that vibrating feeling is if I got a binge. This is the same thing. It's just, and when I say I feel fat, we're usually thinking I'm going to restrict, or I'm going to binge, or I'm going to purge, or weigh myself, or take pills, or count macros, or whatever we do. And then the flip of the coin is I'm going to binge, I'm going to eat all the things. And then whatever cycle happens after that. So any of those like things, those they say sensations, it's real. It's just not necessarily about your body size.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I have clients that, weighed 100 pounds, and I have a clients that weigh 500 pounds. And I feel fat is equally real for everybody. You may not be certain sizes that you feel, or you might be, but it's still not about, there's a difference between like, I can touch my body and this is what my size is, or I see myself and this is what my size is, if it's accurate.
Yes.
And feeling the bigness of our own like internal discomforts. So those sensations you're feeling are real, and they can be really excruciating.
Oh, absolutely.
Going back to that story I told, it's like I thought I was going to die. All that pent up like emotion that I wasn't acknowledging was like big. It was really big, and that's why I felt so fat.
Well, and I think that people, and they will have this feeling in the body that they are attributing to fat. Like they might feel heavy, they might feel weighed down, they might feel just this weight upon them, and they think that it's about like, oh, it's because I'm this size. But like you said, the 100-pound person could be feeling that very same thing. And there are ways that we're inhibited when we're in larger bodies that we aren't in smaller bodies. But that feeling of heaviness that people have, it's generally not physical. There's so much mental, emotional weight that can be lifted that makes a huge difference without like before you even look at the food piece.
Right. And everybody's different which direction I personally go. Some people, that is so provocative to do some of that we just, stay with food and get as attuned as we can. And that stuff starts to become more apparent. Now we have to do this. So, some people I just jump right into the decoding, and some people, let's, build some safety up, build some resilience up, and then we can go there. So, it just depends. And even in this thing applies. Like like you said, even if you're in a larger body and you feel fat, well, there's a difference between, here's your body size, but like you said, the weighed down feeling you can feel. And it just happened actually earlier today with a client session around like her body's not different, but we're just doing some different, some kind of work where she's, lifting some of this heaviness where it's like, I just noticed I felt like going on vacation. She hadn't had that in like years. So that's the kind of stuff we're talking about, is some of that lifting and like, oh, I can feel some connection with joy. And it's not because I lost weight or did something magical, with, whatever. It's just like you free up some space when you stop blaming your body.
Totally. You mentioned the language of the body. And I think this is something that's really mysterious for people. Like they're trying to listen to their body, but they don't really understand how the body speaks to them and all the layers
Mhm.
there are to that. How do you, because I feel like you explain things so beautifully and simply and in the most like straightforward, non fluffy way that I really appreciate. So, how do you begin to introduce somebody to the language of the body?
Well, for clients that are that this is not triggering for, we really just try to make some notes. So you're doing some journaling, and what does that feel like? So, for example, um, when you're trying to check in with hunger and fullness, you might notice if you're actually hungry, some openness, let's say in your belly, or just like openness plus some desire for food, and your anxiety might feel totally different. So describe what that feels like. And so I want to make it, yeah, like you said, very as straightforward as possible, that we have all kinds of sensations in our bodies. Honestly, if we just take a second to locate it and describe it,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to be too much more magical or mysterious. Now, the art of it is the level of compassion and non-judgment we can give to it. That helps it, you know, get resolved a lot faster than when we feel and we collapse back down on it because we feel bad about it or whatever. But I'm trying to give a good example of that language of the body. I think it's just taking some time out purposely and intentionally, just to check in with yourself and know that, like, you can be really, really, really so hungry that's not even in your belly anymore. It could be a weighed down feeling in your shoulders, let's say, and you eat some more and you feel better. Or it could be you're not hungry at all, but you feel weighed down in your shoulders, but it might feel different.
Mm-hmm.
Or eating doesn't fix it. Or it's like, like, can I just like literally maybe put a hand on it just to bring more contact to it? And what does that feel like? Oh, I'm noticing that this left shoulder is higher than the right shoulder. And now that I notice it, I didn't know that I couldn't relax it, but now I can just because I'm paying attention to it. And then you might actually start to feel, whew, I'm actually pretty tired. And I was blaming my body size on that. Well, I think I'm just pretty tired because my left shoulder's up higher than my right shoulder all the time. And that takes energy to do that. And some of this is food related, some of it's not, but just to be in some kind of inquiry is the first step.
Well, and you mentioned that this is really a step that you take when it's not triggering for people. So there are going to be people that presumably don't feel safe necessarily to feel their body right away. How do you work with those sorts of situations?
Well, of course, you don't force it. We just ask, hey, can we experiment with something? And actually, what I do a lot with people, and everybody here listening, I didn't know if I would say this to the end or do it now. This is a good time. Is if you don't know what to do, you're anxious, you don't want to feel anything. And I do this with my most anxious, and still building resilience and safety clients. Is can you just find your feet?
Mm-hmm.
Can you just, if you're sitting on the floor, or you're not sitting on the floor, but if you're sitting in a chair, can you find your feet and feel what the contact feels like between the floor and your. I mean, literally, I have people go through each toe and not rush it, because our tendency is like, oh yeah, I feel the carpet, moving on. No, what does that feel like under the pad of your pinky toe? Can you notice that? And sometimes they can't even notice it. Like, okay, we'll just stay there a few more seconds. And if that feels neutral, we'll just hang out there. And if that's as far as you can go to be in your body, great, not a problem. And then we kind of keep progressing. Can you do the rest of your toes, the balls of your feet, your heels? And, can you feel your bottom being supported by your bed, your chair, if you're sitting in your car, whatever. Um, and then can you feel your back, against the back of a chair? And what does that contact feel like? And what's it like to be supported? And sometimes we just start there, and that's all we do for a while. And that helps at least to like settle enough to where maybe there's some accurate signals of hunger and fullness, or maybe we're just mechanically eating. It just depends on the person.
I love that so much because I think it can be really daunting. I will hear people say, like, I know I needed to feel my feelings, but I just couldn't do it, so I ate instead. And there's this idea that we need to feel everything absolutely, like, all at once, and that can be so daunting because there's so much to feel if we have no experience or practice whatsoever. If there's any trauma involved in all of this,
Mm-hmm.
it's so
Yeah.
much. So being so gentle and so slow with ourselves is so important.
Yeah, I'm glad I was going to bring that up. So this is a good time to bring it up to say it is that this process, and it's understandable, and I wanted it too. I wanted to be. Now I proudly wear the label of not normal, but at the time I wanted to be what I thought was normal, which is like
Oh,
I don't feel anything, I don't have to worry about anything. This is not an issue for me. I don't have feelings that make me feel bad, and I wanted to do it yesterday.
yes. Oh my God, totally.
Right? And so I want to remind everybody, and not as a way of like discouraging me, but this stuff takes time.
Yes.
And I wish I would have had somebody telling me that because I know that it would have been less time if I was able to accept that this takes, this might take years, but it continues to get easier or more, and not easier in terms of feeling sometimes, but easier in knowing and building your capacity and resilience to sometimes being uncomfortable. Like it doesn't feel bad forever. In fact, we kind of start to welcome, like, this is, yeah, I think I got a lot going on here, but let's go there. I'm ready. Let's do this. Because you know that, like, one, it hasn't killed you. Even though sometimes we're afraid of that. That's a whole other podcast too. But
Yeah.
I guess what I want to say is that, like, you don't have to feel the feelings. Just start with, like, can I do hunger and fullness? Can I eat with permission? Can I catch, I do this a lot with clients is, can you catch your diet talk? Just start there. How much time do you catch yourself in a day catching it? And then get mad about that. Like, oh my gosh, if I accumulate this time, I probably spent XYZ hours on this. I don't want to do that. It almost like it's very healthy in this process to get angry at the fact that this culture teaches us to be so disembodied and robs us of a lot. And that anger can fuel a lot of progress.
Yes, totally.
Like
Absolutely.
it's fine to have righteous anger. So don't be afraid of that. Because eventually that helps you have compassion for honestly everybody around you. And you don't get triggered by people's diet talk anymore. It's like, yeah, that's the culture we're in. I get it where they're doing that. I don't want to hear it, but I don't, it doesn't make me want to do anything different.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad that you said that. Because it is important to go through that anger period. And anger comes and goes, but particularly as we're healing the disordered eating stuff, there's so many good reasons for it. And the way that you describe it as a fuel, it's a really functional fuel. And when it's done, when it no longer serves you, it'll go. And
Right.
I think it's particularly hard to go slow for those of us who have dealt with disordered eating because we tend to have a lot of perfectionism around
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
around the food, and we want to, because that's what's given to us, really.
Mm-hmm.
Get
Mm-hmm.
the body in 30 days, or like just follow the 30-day plan hardcore, and you'll live happily ever after. And so for
Right.
us to begin to celebrate, like, oh, I noticed when I was hungry today, it doesn't feel like enough. We feel inadequate. But to begin to start to celebrate those things, I mean,
Right.
I'm always saying slow is fast. The more rooted you can be where you're at and celebratory you can be of these tiny, tiny little things that you've never done before, the more quickly, truly, you're
Oh
going
yeah.
to see more of that peace and ease that you're looking for, which I think is what we're looking for when we say we want to be normal eaters.
Oh yeah. And I use the phrase that we only go as fast as the slowest piece of you can go. So you can totally, do some kind of thing, do some kind of program, read the books or whatever. But if we bypass these little places that like really need us to hang out there for a while, you're going to have to come back around to it anyway. So, if we can do it when it comes up, and for some people that might be going through all the different foods they just need to eat, or going through a period of time of dealing with primal hunger, where it's like, I can eat a whole medium pizza and I don't even feel overly full and I wasn't binging, and that's just what my body needs to do right now. Maybe nothing's wrong.
Yup. Yes. Making the body right and making the process right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm really interested in your journey, how you got from that desire to like, I just want to be normal. I just don't want to have to think about this to like, oh, I'm kind of not normal. Like this got me to a place where I don't even know what the word I want to use is, but like, you're not struggling with the things that the average person struggles with, the average dieter struggles with, the average eater struggles with.
Right. Well, so I went back, and I don't want to sound like I did all this on my own, all this magical stuff happened, and I just knew this
No, none of
stuff.
us did this, of
Um,
course.
and because I think it's really important to recognize that if I probably would have stuck with like regular assistance, like that old, and I went back to that dietitian, by the way, because she just was the only game in town and she happened to be the right game for me.
Yeah.
Um, and I went back to her like last year of college, and that really boosted me really quickly. I think I spent like another 6 months with her and probably gained, if I look at I can look back now because it's been so many years, like, oh, well, that 6 months, that investment, like really probably pushed me, who knows, at least 2 years ahead, maybe 5 years of like struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's like I had another place to feel safe and non-judged, and I can work through these little nuances in a very mirroring back kind of way. So I redid that, which was super helpful. And it made me see, like, again, I think I used, I just started waking up more and more to like the things I was doing in the name of good health, let's say, or in the name of being good and appropriate and acceptable to this culture, were the very things that were part of my disorder, and were also the things that many health professionals, not just dietitians, but all the things that have to do with health, that they collude with. And it made me really, really upset and really angry. And I started to be the bad kid in class in terms of like that with my last year of school and into my internship, and just kind of did everything I had to do to get by, believing in very little of it. And then by the time I graduated, I was doing really well. I wasn't binging. I didn't mean I didn't still have thoughts about like wanting my body to be smaller or little bouts of like, I should work out more, but it was so much better just from that, non-diet work. And then, when I graduated, and I'm like, okay, so just to make a living, I'm going to have to find a job that has nothing to do with weight. So I ended up working in dialysis, and I knew by that time, like, okay, I have to either have a new career or figure out a way to teach whatever this is that I'm doing. And now it's labeled intuitive eating, and like body, health at every size work and whatever. And none of this stuff had names back then. I was just getting little bits and pieces, and really just from my own desperate, like I have lots of videos about my desperate attempts to like, okay, so I hate fruit and vegetables because they were so diet trauma-y, so I'm just not going to eat them. That's now called permission to eat. There wasn't a label for it then. So I just did it because I was desperate, because I was a poor, broke, college student. I couldn't keep affording to buy all this fruit and vegetables and not eat it. And so that's where that came from. Now it's like we tell people eat with permission and don't eat what you don't want to. So that's how these things evolved. And again, how life works out, if it's in your favor for the direction you need to go, I end up moving to the same town and I didn't know I was going to work with eating disorders fully at that time. I knew I would do non-diet, I just didn't know how it would work. And I end up meeting a person who was one of the original dietitians of like the Renfrew Center. And she was a part of that really early movement with intuitive eating with like Evelyn Trivoli and all these other, like this little group of women back then in the 80s and 90s that were touring with Anita Johnson and some of these women who were doing this work. And so anyway, I ended up basically working for her. And, had very intensive, like, supervision for like 4 or 5 hours a week, and saw clients for her. And I did that for a lot of years. And that's kind of how I, got to this place where I'm on my own and all that good stuff. But it was just one of those things. I kind of like burned the boat, in terms of like burn the bridge. Like I can never go back really to over exercising or seeing fitness the same way, where I can't afford, it's like, I would rather that anguish was so awful and it was so life ruining that I would just rather be bigger than to go back to all that cycle. And I'm a super sensitive person, so that I couldn't imagine the idea of teaching somebody else to go on a diet and put them through that cycle. And then they blame themselves, and they would never blame me. They would blame themselves because I'm the expert with quotes.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so I got to find people who do this already if they exist. And if not, do it or have another career. And so that's kind of how, here we are, 12 years later. But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but it's just like,
No, I mean, in a way you did, because you really paved your own way, because there were all of these quote normal paths laid out. Like you could be a normal dietitian, like here's a path, or you could fall into this category, or you could fall into this category. And you took it into your own experience in your own body and your own like empathetic, I don't want this for other people. I've been through this, and completely carved your own path. It's really extraordinary.
well, I appreciate that. And at the time, I just, I didn't really think it was extraordinary. I was like, this is like
Oh, we
the
never
only,
do. Of course not.
yeah. I was thinking like, I don't want to like, I'm feeling kind of like embarrassed a little bit. I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that. I was just thinking like, there's no other way. Like I can't, I'll have to just go to school to be a PA or something, because I can't be the dietitian that I'm taught I'm supposed to be with my history and what I know that it does to people. So there's no other option. There's just like another career or this. That's it.
Yeah, I think that's how it is for people who end up carving their own paths, is like, there is no other way. Everything else hurts too much. Nothing else makes
Yeah.
sense. And you end up creating something just extraordinary and new and
Right.
beautiful and actually
Right.
useful for people. Like that's actually helping people.
Yeah. And that's, I think, I'm hoping that story is helpful for y'all, that you're not going to necessarily be a nutrition therapist or a coach or something, but what I want you to know, that your journey with intuitive eating, attuned eating, however you label it for yourself, is, and this goes back to something I know, Randy, we're going to talk about, is like being willing to be different, because not many people are going to totally, unless you're in our, in our groups, or you work with somebody that has done this before. It's like, people aren't going to get it. They're going to think like, what are you talking about? There's no good food or bad food. And the people don't, when people say holistic health, it's just another label for like eating right. It's truly, when you think about holistic health, really in this context, it's like, no, everything you do, you're looking at the bigger picture ramifications on your mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And that makes you weird, because it's like,
it's funny how this pulls us, or so many people are pulled in, because we've been so crazy for so long with the disorder and the dysfunction and with food in our bodies, that we think like, oh, normal is the pinnacle. But what we want is peace. What we want is ease.
Right.
And what we're going to find is that, like you said, this is kind of weird. It's not normal to not worry about food.
Right.
Is everybody's stressed a little bit. Everybody's being good or being bad. Everybody's trying to get on some sort of plan. That is what's normal.
Right. So I think about, there's so many things I want to say about this, because this feels like the stuff that I think if I would have heard 20 years ago, I would have felt way more hopeful about this whole process, because I didn't know. But I was like, you know what? It's going to be okay that at some point that you're more normal than most normal people, which is most people go on a diet and they don't think it's a big deal. And then they blame themselves and hate themselves for the fact that they can't be what the cultural ideal says they should be if they try hard enough. Like, that's what I grew up saying. I thought it was, and I dreaded it. Like, as a preteen and a like 8 and 9-year-old, I was like, oh God, I don't want to grow up, and I don't really want to be a woman, because it's like, well, this sucks. Like, you got to hate your body. You got to like do all this. So my grandmother and my mother, it's like our foremothers dieted or didn't like themselves in some way. So it's like, well, that's what you think of how it's going to be. And I'm like, ugh, so when you have this, already have this patterning, and then the world reinforces that, it's not real exciting, and that's what seems normal. So in my mind, I was like, okay, well, normal would be that I don't obsess too much, but maybe I'll still worry about things a little, whatever. I tell my clients, like, I don't think that's good enough for you. We're not going to settle for that. No way.
Yeah. So I'm glad you said settle, because I think what that is apathy. I think that's just like, well, I've cared too much, so now I'm just not going to care at all.
Yeah.
And which leads me to definitions of intuitive eating or attuned eating, which is not a phrase that I've heard before, but I know that it's something that you use. What is the difference between attuned and intuitive eating?
Well, okay. So I have zero, even though the intuitive eating book, and I know these people, so there's no knocks against it. Thank goodness for them.
Yes.
And I know that sometimes to get a book, published, you got to put some diety stuff in there. I get it.
Yeah.
And I think that the next iteration will be even less like that because they're actually personally not in that belief system, in that camp. But I remember reading this book, and I'm so like pretty hardcore about like, non-diet living and health at every size. And like, not that there's like your body changing size isn't inherently the issue. It's like that desperate desire for it making you happy is the problem. That I remember in that book, because at the time there's only like the first or second iteration of it, editions. And I remember thinking, well, it's not, I was just had one of those moments, in between clients, like, it's not really actually intuitive in our culture to eat from hunger and fullness.
Mm-hmm.
What feels the word, like I was just sitting there, I'm like, oh, attuned. Like I'm actually asking people to be attuned to what their body feels or what they feel in their body. I just start using that term. So I didn't like totally make it up, but it felt like, oh, I'm actually teaching people how to be attuned. And so I was writing down the things that I thought attuned eating were, which is like, of course, eating for hunger and fullness. But it also includes, sometimes we eat the cookies because they're hot out of the oven and you're not hungry. Mm-hmm. But you're attuned to the fact emotionally that would be really yummy. And you're also attuned to like, and there's a place where that won't feel so yummy, even though that, they're still good. To me, attunement is like, it's Friday night. I want to have some play. And I'm pretty bored, and I know I'm bored, but I'm going to carry up pizza for fun anyway. And there's nothing wrong with that, and not having any guilt. So I was just adding these like nuances and layers to it a little bit. So it's not, because it's really easy for us, of course, to turn it into the intuitive eating diet and doing it right. So I was just like sitting there one day thinking, like, what else? What is this process really? And then it's really about, like you said, peace, and it's about freedom, and it's about like not caring. It's like, it's not caring about what you eat, but it just has its proper place. Like, okay, we're hedging our bets. We're going to hedge our bets. We eat our fruit and vegetables, eat our olive oil, whatever, because that's all the best we've got in terms of like helpfulness for our health. But it's like, it's just such a small piece of it. You do your best, you hedge your bets, you go outside and play, and you just keep listening, and you'll get feedback that's trustable.
It's so beautiful. And I think that what I think it can be a little bit scary, even though what I hear people saying over and over again is, oh my gosh, all I want is freedom. All I want is freedom. And for those beginning stages, it feels like, oh my God, I just don't want to care, because so much energy has been put into that. But sure. I think the fear is like, how much, like, can I really trust myself to be that free? Because what you described with attuned eating is so big picture. Like it's this expansive, allowing yourself to experiment, allowing yourself to be in your body, in the moment, figuring out what works for any given situation with all of these layers and all of these nuances. And it's not as cut and dry and black and white.
Right. Well, and I guess I'll add to that, and to help bring some containment to that fear is like, that's the big picture. But the small stuff is like doing the things that we all rebel against because we're so exhausted from all the watching. And that's where it comes back to, people want to bypass the detail stuff, which I wanted to as well. Which is, well, I actually need you to stop and pay attention to your hunger and fullness at breakfast. And what does that feel like? Nobody wants to do that because, who wants to feel all that? You just want to be done. Yeah. I get it. And then once you start doing that a little bit, it'll feel less scary. It'll get easier. And then you actually start to get a little bit more curious and excited, like, oh, I wonder what my body could want, or what does it need right now? And you start to see those puzzle pieces. You start to see like how it could be possible. But at the beginning, when we're so panicked about like, oh my gosh, if I eat what I want, I'm going to be 1,000 pounds and nobody will love me. That's it. It's like, you feel like it's an impending doom. Yes. Because nobody's ever taught you that, okay, even if you were that much weight, you're still inherently lovable. But we don't hear that unless you work with somebody, get in the groups, read some books, you see it. It's almost like it feels like a free for all when it's really not. But you do have to kind of put in, I would say, like, instead of literally saying the work, it's more about, are you willing to not abandon yourself?
Oh, I love that. I really, really love that. And I'm glad that you simplified it, because I think what's important for people to know is that if it does feel scary, like, it's totally okay that you're scared, but it's these baby steps, and every step should feel gentle. Every step should feel so doable, not like you're jumping off a cliff. And
I mean, there are things that even when I work class, I had to slow them down. Like, I know you want to be able to eat all the desserts and not feel bingy about it, but can we put that into smaller pieces and say, is there something that you feel more safe about eating that you're less likely to binge on first? Let's do that. Let's create some successes and keep building, get feedback. And also notice like how situational it is when it's easier or harder or whatever. And so you just build this big body of evidence of like how trustable you are. It's just that you can't control everything that happens. And our job is to help, we're learning how to be more grounded and less reactive. So when crappy stuff happens or feelings feel big, that, it's figure outable, meaning it's not like you're necessarily going to go all the way back to binging. You might feel bingy, but that doesn't mean that you can't create a gap and decide, I can do that. But maybe what I really just want here is to sit and cry. Mm-hmm. But that happens when you've been willing for like a couple weeks or a couple months to not abandon the fact that like, this is really, really scary. And all I can do right now is kind of like, just really do intuitive eating from hunger and fullness. And it's kind of some permission, but it's not as much permission as I want, and be okay with that's just where you're at. It'll get better.
Yes. And I think being really gentle with yourself when you do abandon yourself, because if that's what we've been doing our whole lives, like there's just so much self-compassion needed, and it's okay for it to be really gentle. This is amazing. I could talk to you. I feel like 500 different things. So we might have to do more episodes. This is so wonderful. We will have the links for people who want to work with you posted in the show notes, of people who want to see more about what your work is about, or just want to read your blogs or see what other things that you have available. Is there anything else that you feel like you want to share that got left out that you feel like, oh, I really wish I would have mentioned that?
Oh my gosh. Well,
I mean, there are a million things.
There are a million things. I was thinking, we should do this again so we can talk about some more of the somatic work. But yes. I would say that recognize that the hallmarks, and I do this to normalize all of our situations, is the hallmarks of struggling with chronic dieting or disordered eating is that, somewhere along the line, we had some deficits in probably 3 areas, which is not feeling entitled to get our needs met. With hunger and fullness in particular, but also just in general, not really having a full on board, like ability to self-soothe. And I think those are the 2 biggest things. So recognize that this isn't your fault. You didn't just say, I'm going to go on a diet and then I'm going to struggle with this forever. And I'm so lacking in willpower. I'm not emotionally strong enough. It's like, there were some things that this has been in the works, honestly, probably most of our lives. Mm-hmm. And so we want to be really compassionate, and you're not weirdos. You're not wrong. You're not different, whatever. It's just like, this is just the way that we've done the best we can to handle overwhelming circumstances, being in this early overwhelming world that's too fast and too much, and doesn't really have the capacity to see and hear and be with each other in the way that's necessary to be, as grounded or feeling as safe as we need. So one way, our doorway, what happens to be our doorway, and is just this food and body stuff. And it's totally possible to be at peace.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. One final question, and this is one that I ask everybody at the end of the episode. This is the Free Spirit Academy podcast. And when I define a free spirit, I just say it's when we get to be ourselves. So me getting to be me, you getting to be you. How do you define a free spirit in your words?
Oh my goodness. I would say somebody who's able to see what's going on in the world and be okay with being set apart from that, if that's what is accurate for you.
Yes. Ooh, I love that. This is fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Like you said, I think we could talk another 6 hours, but
for sure.
I think people are like, okay, guys, wrap it up.
We'll do this in bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I hope this was really helpful for everybody who listens.
I really think it will be. you enjoyed this conversation. For more on food and body freedom, get my free ebook, The Eat to Feel Good Diet, by signing up for newsletter updates at freespirit-academy.com. I will be back with you next week.